It was one of those typical Tuesday evenings in Los Angeles when most people are just trying to get through the week. The kind of night where nothing special is supposed to happen. At Cicada, a beautiful Italian restaurant tucked away in downtown LA, soft jazz music played in the background while the smell of fresh garlic bread and tomato sauce filled the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the white tablecloths and polished silverware. The restaurant wasn't packed, but it had a decent crowd. Couples sat close together, sharing plates of pasta. A few business types were wrapping up late meetings over glasses of wine. In the corner, families celebrated birthdays with chocolate cake and candles. It was the perfect picture of a peaceful evening, the kind where everyone minds their own business and enjoys their food. At a small corner table near the window sat a man in his late 50s, dressed simply in a black jacket and dark jeans. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed for attention. He had a book propped up against the salt shaker, and every few bites of his meal he'd turn a page. His posture was relaxed, almost like he was sitting in his own living room rather than a public restaurant. Most people walking by wouldn't have given him a second glance. He looked like any other person enjoying a quiet dinner alone, but this wasn't just any person. This was Keanu Reeves. Now here's the thing about Keanu. Unlike most celebrities who walk around with bodyguards and assistants, demanding special treatment and the best tables, he's always been different. He takes the subway. He eats at regular places. He doesn't make a fuss, so when he sat there that evening, slowly working through his plate of spaghetti and occasionally sipping his water, nobody really bothered him. A few people had noticed him, sure. There were some quick glances and whispered conversations, but most folks just let him be. That's the unspoken rule in LA. You see famous people, you give them space. About 3 tables away from Keanu sat a group of 4 young men, probably in their early 30s. They were the loud type, the kind of group that makes everyone else in the restaurant aware of their presence whether they want to be or not. They wore expensive suits, the kind with designer labels visible from across the room. Their watches caught the light every time they gestured, which was often. They'd been there for about an hour, celebrating some kind of business victory. Empty beer bottles were already piling up on their table, and their voices kept getting louder with each round. The ringleader of the group was a guy with slicked back hair and a smile that seemed a bit too confident. He had that energy of someone who'd recently made some money and wanted everyone to know about it. His friends hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes a little too hard, agreeing with everything he said. You could tell he was used to being the center of attention, and he loved it. As the waiter brought their 4th round of drinks, one of his buddies leaned in and said something while pointing discreetly toward Keanu's table. The ringleader's eyes went wide for a second, then he squinted, leaning forward to get a better look. A grin spread across his face, the kind that usually means trouble is about to start. "No way," he said, loud enough that a few nearby tables turned to look. "Is that who I think it is?" His friends nodded, some looking excited, others looking a bit nervous about where this might be heading. But the ringleader was already standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He grabbed his beer bottle and took a long swig, as if fueling up for what he was about to do. "I've got to say something," he announced to his table, that confident grin still plastered on his face. "This is too good to pass up." One of his friends grabbed his arm. "Man, maybe just leave it. Let the guy eat." But he shook off the hand, his confidence boosted by alcohol and the attention of his group. "Relax, I'm just going to have some fun." What's he going to do? The thing about restaurants is that they have this delicate ecosystem of noise. There's the clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the occasional laugh or cough. Everyone's in their own little bubble, having their own experience. But when something disrupts that balance, when one element gets too loud or out of place, everyone notices.
It's like a record scratch in a movie. That's what happened when this guy stood up and started walking toward Keanu's table.
The energy shifted. Conversations at nearby tables started to fade. People sensed something was about to happen, that uncomfortable feeling you get when you know you're about to witness something awkward. Keanu, still focused on his book, didn't seem to notice at first. He was in his own world, probably thousands of miles away in whatever story he was reading. His fork moved from his plate to his mouth in that automatic way people eat when they're really absorbed in something else. He'd worked all day on a film set, doing his own stunts like he always insisted on doing, and this quiet dinner was his reward. Just him, a good book, and some pasta. Simple pleasures. The loud guy was now halfway across the restaurant floor, weaving slightly between tables. His friends were watching with a mixture of amusement and concern. Other diners had definitely picked up on what was happening now. An older couple stopped their conversation mid-sentence. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks paused, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The manager, a well-dressed woman in her 40s who'd been seating a new party, glanced over with a frown forming on her face. As he got closer to Keanu's table, the guy's confidence seemed to grow even more. He had an audience now, not just his friends but half the restaurant. And like a lot of people who've had too much to drink, he mistook attention for approval. He didn't see the worried faces or the people looking away uncomfortably. He just saw people watching, and that was enough. Keanu finally looked up from his book, sensing someone standing close to his table. His expression was calm, maybe a little curious, but not annoyed. He'd been in this situation before countless times. Fans wanting autographs, people wanting selfies, others just wanting to say hello. He was always gracious about it, always kind. He set his book down carefully, marking his page with a napkin, and looked up with a small, polite smile. "Hey there," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying that gentle quality that somehow made him sound both friendly and slightly tired. "Can I help you with something?" The restaurant had gone notably quieter now. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into the background. People at nearby tables weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. This was LA, where celebrity sightings were common. But something about this interaction felt different. The air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. What happened next would turn a quiet Tuesday dinner into a story that people would be talking about for years to come. But in that moment, as Keanu looked up with his trademark patience and the other man stood there with his beer and his confidence, nobody knew just how memorable this evening was about to become. The stage was set. The restaurant held its breath. And what came next would teach everyone present a lesson about respect, humility, and the difference between fame and character. The guy with the slicked back hair stood there for a moment, swaying just slightly, that beer bottle still in his hand. He looked down at Keanu with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. You know that look some people get when they think they're about to say something incredibly clever? That was the expression painted all over his face. "So you're that guy, right?" he said, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "The one from the movies?" Keanu nodded slowly, his polite smile still in place. "Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you." He extended his hand for a handshake because that's just who Keanu is, even when someone approaches him during dinner. Even when he's clearly trying to have a quiet evening, he still treats them with respect. But the guy didn't take his hand. Instead, he let out this loud, exaggerated laugh that made several people jump in their seats. "Oh man, this is perfect," he said, turning back to look at his friends, who were watching with increasingly uncomfortable expressions. "Guys, it's really him. It's the whoa guy." He turned back to Keanu and did this mocking impression, holding his hands up and saying "whoa" in the most ridiculous voice you can imagine. His friends laughed, but it was that nervous kind of laughter that people do when they're not sure if something is funny or just mean. Keanu lowered his hand slowly, that smile fading just a bit, but his voice remained calm. "Yeah, I've said that a few times in movies. Listen, I'm just trying to have some dinner, so if you don't mind—" Nah. The guy interrupted, waving his beer bottle dismissively. He was clearly on a roll now, feeding off the attention. "I've got to know something. How does it feel playing basically the same character in every single movie? I mean, serious question here." A woman at the next table whispered to her husband, "Someone needs to stop this." But nobody moved. It's funny how that works. Everyone thinks someone else should step in, so nobody does. The manager was making her way over, but she was on the far side of the restaurant, weaving between tables. Keanu took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying to keep your patience. "I try to bring something different to each role. But look, I really appreciate you being a fan? The guy cut him off again, laughing even harder now. "Who said I was a fan? I'm just saying you've got a pretty sweet gig, right? Same moves, same facial expressions. Must be nice getting paid millions to just show up and look serious." He did another mocking impression, this time pretending to do slow-motion action moves, nearly knocking over a water glass on a nearby table. The elderly couple sitting there had to grab their glasses to keep them from falling. They looked upset, but the guy didn't seem to notice or care. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed level. "I work pretty hard at what I do. Train for months, do my own stunts. Oh, here we go with the stunts, the guy shouted, cutting him off yet again. By now he'd fully committed to being the center of attention, and he was going to milk it for everything it was worth. Yeah, we've all heard about how you do your own stunts. Very impressive, jumping off buildings and whatever. But let's be real. You've got stunt coordinators, safety wires, the whole deal. It's not like you're actually in danger. One of his friends had stood up now and was trying to wave him back to their table. Hey man, come on. Let's just sit down and finish our drinks. But the ringleader wasn't having it. He shrugged off his friend's concerns with an annoyed gesture. I'm just having a conversation here. What, is he too famous to talk to regular people? The thing is, the way he said regular people had this edge to it, like he was resentful of something. Maybe it was the fame, maybe it was the success, or maybe he just had too much to drink and his true colors were showing. Whatever it was, the whole restaurant could feel the tension building like a pressure cooker about to explode. Keanu closed his book completely now and set it aside. He folded his hands on the table, and for just a second you could see something flash across his face. Not anger exactly, but maybe disappointment. The kind of look a teacher gives a student who they know is capable of better behavior. Listen, Keanu said quietly, and something about his tone made even the drunk guy pause for a second. I don't know what's going on with you tonight, but I'm going to ask you nicely one more time to please let me finish my dinner. There was no threat in his voice, no aggression, just a simple, direct request from one human being to another. For a moment it seemed like maybe the message would get through. Maybe the guy would realize he'd crossed a line and back off. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen. But then the guy's face twisted into this ugly sneer. Whatever moment of clarity might have been coming disappeared, drowned in alcohol and ego. Oh, so now you're too good to talk to me, he said, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. The great action hero can't handle a little criticism? What are you going to do, throw me out with your kung fu moves? He started doing these ridiculous karate chop motions, nearly hitting a waiter who was trying to pass by with a tray of food. The waiter had to do this awkward dance to avoid getting hit, and the plates on his tray rattled dangerously. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your table, the waiter said firmly, but the guy just laughed in his face. Oh, now the staff is getting involved. This is great. He turned back to Keanu, leaning on the table now, getting right in his space. You know what your problem is? You think you're some kind of down-to-earth humble guy, but you're just another Hollywood phony. Taking the subway, wearing regular clothes, it's all an act, isn't it? Several people in the restaurant were openly staring now, and not in a curious way. They looked angry. A few were pulling out their phones, though. Whether to call for help or record what was happening, it was hard to say. The manager had finally made it through the maze of tables and was rushing over. Her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and determination. Keanu just sat there, looking up at this guy who was now practically on top of him, invading every bit of his personal space. And the remarkable thing was, Keanu still hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't gotten aggressive. He hadn't even told the guy off, which honestly, everyone watching felt he would have been completely justified in doing. I think you've had a bit too much to drink, Keanu said softly. Maybe you should head home, get some rest. Things will look different in the morning. It was such a kind response to such aggressive behavior that several people in the restaurant actually gasped. Here was someone being openly mocked and harassed, and his response was concern for the other person's well-being. It was the kind of grace under pressure that you don't see very often in real life. But the drunk guy didn't see it as grace. He saw it as weakness. Oh, now you're trying to parent me? He said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. That's rich. What are you, my dad? You don't even know me. You're right, I don't, Keanu replied calmly. But I know that tomorrow you're probably going to feel pretty bad about this, and I'm just trying to save you from that. The manager had arrived at the table now, slightly out of breath. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing our other guests. The guy spun around to face her, that same ugly sneer on his face. Disturbing the guests? I'm just talking to your celebrity customer here. What, does he get special treatment because he's famous? He gets the same treatment as everyone else, the manager said firmly. Which means he gets to eat his dinner in peace without being harassed. Now please return to your table or I'll have to call security. For a second it looked like the guy might actually comply. His shoulders sagged a bit and some of the fight seemed to drain out of him. His friends were motioning urgently for him to come back, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. But then something changed. Maybe it was the fact that everyone was watching. Maybe it was his pride kicking in. Maybe he just couldn't stand the idea of backing down in front of an audience. Whatever it was, he straightened back up and turned to face the restaurant. "You all think he's so great, don't you?" he shouted. His arms spread wide like some kind of deranged preacher, the humble movie star eating alone with his book. "But he's not special. He's just an actor who got lucky." The restaurant was dead silent now except for his voice. Even the kitchen noise had stopped, as if the chefs had come out to see what all the commotion was about. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet, and that's when something unexpected happened. Something that would completely change the direction of this entire evening. Something that nobody, especially not the drunk guy making a scene, could have possibly predicted. An elderly man in a wheelchair was being pushed toward the restroom by his daughter when they passed near Keanu's table. And the old man, who probably should have just kept going, who had every reason to stay out of this mess, suddenly put up his hand to stop his daughter from pushing him any further. The elderly man raised a shaky hand, signaling his daughter to stop pushing the wheelchair. She looked down at him with concern, probably wondering if he was feeling okay, but he shook his head gently. He wanted to stop right there, right next to all this chaos. The drunk guy was still standing by Keanu's table, chest puffed out, waiting for someone to challenge him or agree with him or do something. He hadn't even noticed the wheelchair stopping just a few feet behind him. He was too caught up in his own performance. "Excuse me, young man," the elderly man said. His voice was thin and weathered, the kind of voice that comes from decades of living, but it carried surprisingly well in the silent restaurant. "You're blocking the path." The drunk guy turned around, looking annoyed at the interruption. When he saw the elderly man in the wheelchair, he rolled his eyes and stepped to the side, but just barely. "Yeah, sure, whatever. Go around." The daughter, a woman probably in her late 40s with worry lines etched around her eyes, started to push the wheelchair past, but the old man put his hand on the wheel, stopping her again. He looked directly at the drunk guy with these piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut right through all the noise and nonsense. "That man you're harassing," the old man said, nodding toward Keanu. "Do you have any idea who he really is?" The drunk guy laughed, throwing his arms up. "Yeah, I know exactly who he is. He's an overpaid actor who—" "No," the old man interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger. "You don't know him at all. You know his movies. You know his face. But you don't know the first thing about who he actually is." Something about the way the old man said it made everyone lean in a little closer. Even the drunk guy seemed caught off guard, his mouth hanging open mid-sentence. His friends at their table had gone completely quiet, watching this unfold with wide eyes. The daughter looked uncomfortable, gently touching her father's shoulder. "Dad, we don't need to get involved in this." But the old man wasn't listening. He kept his eyes locked on the drunk guy, and there was something in his expression that suggested he had a story to tell. One of those stories that needed to be told regardless of whether it was convenient or not. 15 years ago, the old man began, his voice taking on the quality of someone remembering something both painful and precious. "My daughter here was driving home from work. It was late, around 10 at night, and the roads were mostly empty." The daughter's face had gone pale. She clearly knew where this was going, and she didn't seem thrilled about sharing it with a restaurant full of strangers. But she didn't stop him either. Maybe she knew her father needed to say this. She was stopped at a red light when a drunk driver ran the light and hit her car from the side. Sent her spinning across the intersection. The old man's voice cracked slightly. Her car flipped 3 times before it stopped. You could feel the energy in the restaurant shift. People weren't just watching anymore. They were listening, really listening. Even the drunk guy had gone quiet, his earlier bravado starting to crack around the edges. The daughter wiped at her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't remember most of it. The doctors said I was in and out of consciousness. But I remember being terrified. There was blood, broken glass everywhere, and I couldn't move. I thought I was going to die alone on that street." Keanu had gone very still in his chair. He wasn't looking at anyone, just down at his hands folded on the table. If you didn't know better, you might think he was trying to make himself invisible. "But she didn't die alone," the old man continued. "Because someone stopped. In Los Angeles, where people usually just drive past accidents, where everyone's too busy or too scared to get involved, someone stopped." The daughter nodded, tears flowing freely now. "He pulled over immediately, ran to my car, called 911, and then he just stayed. He held my hand through the broken window and kept talking to me. telling me to stay awake, that help was coming, that I was going to be okay. For 2 hours, the old man added, his own eyes glistening. 2 hours he sat there on that dirty street holding my daughter's hand, keeping her conscious and calm until the paramedics could get her out safely. The drunk guy's face had changed completely. All that smugness, all that confidence, it was draining away like water from a cracked glass. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The paramedics told us later who he was, the daughter said, looking directly at Keanu now. We didn't recognize him at first. He was just this kind stranger covered in my blood, refusing to leave until he knew I was stable. Keanu finally looked up, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away again. He looked uncomfortable with the attention, almost embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said quietly. But they didn't, the old man said firmly. 12 cars passed that intersection before you stopped. 12. We counted them later on the traffic cameras. You were the only one who stopped. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the ice settling in someone's water glass 3 tables away. The drunk guy just stood there frozen like someone had hit pause on him, but the daughter wasn't finished. That wasn't even the end of it. He came to visit me in the hospital. 3 times. Brought flowers, asked how I was doing, if there was anything I needed, and then we found out later, through a slip from one of the hospital administrators, that he'd paid a portion of my medical bills anonymously. $20,000, the old man said. We only found out because there was a paperwork mix-up at the hospital billing department. He never wanted us to know. Keanu shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's not something I really want to talk about, he said softly, but the old man shook his head. Maybe you don't want to talk about it, but this young man here needs to hear it. He needs to understand what kind of person he's been mocking. The drunk guy looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His face had gone from red with alcohol and confidence to pale with shame. His hands were shaking slightly and he seemed unable to look at anyone directly. Then something else happened. A waiter, a young guy probably in his mid-20s, stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the kitchen door. If we're sharing stories, he said, his voice tentative but determined, I've got one too. The manager looked at him surprised but didn't stop him. He walked closer to where everyone was gathered, wringing his hands nervously. I've been working here for 3 years, the waiter said. Mr. Reeves has been coming in regularly for most of that time. Always orders simple, always polite, and always tips 75%. Every single time. Not once has he tipped less. He paused, looking at Keanu with genuine affection. But that's not even the important part. He asks about our lives, remembers our names, our kids' names, what we're studying in school. Last year when my mom was sick and I was stressed about medical bills, he somehow found out and sent money to the hospital anonymously. I only knew it was him because the administrator mentioned a generous donor from LA, and the amount matched exactly what I'd mentioned to him in passing one night. Another person stood up. An older woman, probably in her 70s, sitting with her husband near the window. My husband and I met him on the subway last year, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. We were struggling with our groceries, and he not only gave up his seat to me, but he helped us carry our bags up 4 flights of stairs to our apartment. Refused to let us give him anything for it. Just smiled and said he hoped we had a good day. Her husband nodded vigorously, asked if we needed help with anything else. In this city, where most people won't make eye contact on the train, this man treated us like we mattered. One by one, other people in the restaurant started speaking up. A middle-aged man talked about how Keanu had helped jump-start his car in a parking lot and waited to make sure it kept running. A young couple shared how he'd paid for their meal once when he overheard them saying it was their anniversary, and they were on a tight budget. A woman with 2 kids mentioned how he'd entertained her children in a waiting room at the DMV for 20 minutes while she dealt with paperwork, making them laugh with silly faces and magic tricks. Each story was small on its own, little acts of kindness that anyone could do, but that most people don't. But together, they painted a picture of someone who moved through the world with genuine care for other people, not because cameras were watching, not because he wanted recognition, but because that's just who he was. The drunk guy was openly crying now, tears streaming down his face as story after story demolished whatever image he'd had in his mind. His friends had come over, standing nearby with their heads down, clearly ashamed by association. Through it all, Keanu sat quietly at his table, looking more and more uncomfortable with each story. He hadn't asked for any of this attention. He'd just wanted to eat his dinner and read his book. But life had other plans, and now his years of quiet kindness were being laid bare for everyone to see. The old man in the wheelchair reached out and put his hand on the drunk guy's arm. Not roughly, but gently, like a grandfather trying to teach a lesson to a grandson who'd lost his way. "So when you stand here and mock this man," the old man said softly, "when you reduce him to just an actor, just a movie star, just someone playing the same character over and over, you're showing everyone in this restaurant exactly who you are. And son, it's not a good look." The silence that followed the old man's words was heavy, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The drunk guy stood there with tears running down his face, his whole body trembling. All that swagger, all that confidence from earlier had completely evaporated. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life in front of dozens of witnesses. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came out at first. Finally, he managed to choke out something that sounded like, "I'm sorry," but it was so quiet and broken that barely anyone heard it. Keanu, who'd been sitting silently through all the testimonials, finally pushed his chair back and stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and everyone in the restaurant watched him with held breath. For a moment, nobody knew what he was going to do. Would he yell? Would he tell the guy exactly what he thought of him? Would he just walk out? He did none of those things. Instead, Keanu walked around his table and approached the drunk guy, who actually flinched as if expecting to be hit or shoved. But Keanu just stood there for a moment, looking at this man who'd spent the last 15 minutes mocking him, insulting him, making a complete spectacle of himself at Keanu's expense. Then Keanu did something that nobody expected. He placed his hand gently on the guy's shoulder, the same way you might comfort a friend who was going through a hard time. The gesture was so simple, so kind, that several people in the restaurant audibly gasped. "Hey," Keanu said softly, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying across the silent restaurant. "It's okay. We all have bad days. We all make mistakes." The drunk guy's face crumpled completely. He started sobbing, not the quiet tears from before, but full body-shaking sobs. "I'm so sorry," he managed to get out between gasps. "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that. I had too much to drink and I thought I was being funny and I know," Keanu said, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've been drinking, you got caught up in the moment. I get it, I'm not angry. But you should be," the guy practically shouted, tears and snot running down his face. He looked completely undone. Nothing like the confident jerk from 15 minutes ago. "I was horrible to you. I said terrible things. I embarrassed you in front of all these people. You should be furious with me." Keanu shook his head slowly. "Being angry at you doesn't help anyone. You're clearly going through something. Maybe it's work stress, maybe it's something else. But whatever it is, I hope it gets better. I really do." The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern, seemed to break something in the drunk guy. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. His friends rushed over, looking mortified. One of them put a hand on his back while another kept apologizing to everyone around them. "We're so sorry," one friend said, looking at Keanu with desperate eyes. "He's not usually like this. He's been under a lot of pressure at work, and he drank way too much tonight. That's not an excuse, I know, but please understand this isn't who he really is." But another friend cut in, his voice harder. "Actually, maybe it is who he's becoming. This isn't the first time he's done something like this. Different situation, but the same attitude. The same need to tear other people down to make himself feel bigger." The drunk guy looked up at his friend, hurt, and anger flashing across his tear-stained face. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," the friend said, not backing down. "Last month with that waiter you insulted, because your steak wasn't cooked right. 2 weeks ago when you made fun of that homeless guy outside our office. You've been getting meaner, more aggressive. Tonight just happens to be the night it blew up in your face because you picked the wrong person to mess with." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and the drunk guy seemed to shrink even smaller under their weight. Around the restaurant, people were nodding, recognizing the pattern. This wasn't just about one bad night. This was about a person who'd lost their way somewhere along the line. The manager, who'd been standing off to the side, finally stepped forward. Her expression was professional but firm. "Gentlemen, I think it's time for you to settle your bill and leave. We can't have this kind of disturbance in our establishment." The friends nodded quickly, already pulling out their wallets. But the drunk guy looked up at the manager with red, swollen eyes. "I understand. I'll pay for his meal too," he said, gesturing to Keanu. "And everyone else's, everyone in the restaurant. It's the least I can do." Keanu immediately shook his head. "That's not necessary, really. Please," the guy said, his voice breaking again. "Please let me do this. I can't take back what I said or how I acted. But I can at least do this one thing, please." There was something desperate in his plea, like he needed this gesture to mean something, to somehow start making up for what he'd done. Keanu looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If it helps you feel better, okay, but you don't owe me anything, and you don't owe anyone else here anything either. What you owe is to yourself, be better. That's all." The drunk guy nodded frantically, wiping at his face with his sleeve. His friends helped him to his feet, and one of them went to talk to the manager about the bill. The restaurant had started to buzz with quiet conversation again, people processing what they'd just witnessed. But before the group could leave, the elderly man in the wheelchair called out to them. "Young man, wait a moment." The drunk guy turned, looking terrified of what else might be said. The old man wheeled himself a bit closer, his daughter following behind. "I want you to know something," the old man said, his voice softer now, less stern. "I wasn't telling you that story to make you feel bad. Well, not just to make you feel bad. I was telling you because I think you needed to hear it. You needed to understand that the world isn't what you thought it was." The drunk guy nodded, unable to speak. "You're young," the old man continued. "You've got your whole life ahead of you. And right now, tonight, you're at a crossroads. You can leave here and forget this ever happened. Go back to being the person you've been becoming. Or you can leave here and let this change you. Let this be the night you remember whenever you're about to say something mean, do something cruel, or judge someone without knowing their story." The daughter stepped forward and did something surprising. She handed the drunk guy a small card. "That's my email address," she said quietly. "If you ever need to talk, if you're struggling and need someone to remind you to be better, reach out. What happened to me was horrible, but it brought that man into my life." She gestured to Keanu. "And he showed me that there are genuinely good people in this world. Maybe tonight you can start becoming one of them." The drunk guy took the card with shaking hands, staring at it like it was some kind of sacred object. He looked up at her, then at the old man, then at Keanu, and finally around at all the people in the restaurant who'd witnessed his complete humiliation and transformation. "I will," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "I promise I will. I'm going to be better. Starting now. Starting tonight." His friends led him toward the exit, stopping at the manager's desk to arrange payment for the entire restaurant's meals. As they waited, the drunk guy turned back one more time to look at Keanu, who'd returned to his table and was gathering his things. "Thank you," the drunk guy called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant one last time. But this time, instead of mockery and aggression, it was filled with genuine gratitude and regret. "Thank you for being kind when you had every right to be cruel." Keanu looked up, met his eyes, and gave him a small nod. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, something good had come from this whole ugly situation. As the group finally left the restaurant, the door closing behind them with a soft chime, the atmosphere inside began to shift. People started clapping. It started with just one or two people, then spread like wildfire until the entire restaurant was applauding. But they weren't clapping for the drunk guy's exit. They were clapping for something else entirely. They were clapping for Keanu. He stood there by his table, looking uncomfortable and overwhelmed, shaking his head and holding up his hands as if to say, "Please stop." But nobody stopped. If anything, the applause grew louder. People stood up from their tables, some wiping tears from their own eyes, all of them moved by what they'd witnessed. The old man started it. Then others joined in, and soon the entire restaurant was on its feet, giving a standing ovation to a man who'd done nothing but respond to cruelty with kindness, to mockery with grace, to aggression with compassion. Keanu's face was red with embarrassment. He looked around at all these people applauding him, and you could see he genuinely didn't understand what all the fuss was about. In his mind, he'd just been himself. He'd just done what felt right. The fact that others found it extraordinary said more about the world than it did about him. Finally, when the applause started to die down and people began returning to their seats, Keanu picked up his book and his jacket. He approached the manager, who was wiping tears from her own eyes. Keanu approached the manager's desk, reaching for his wallet, but she immediately shook her head and held up her hand. "Your meal is on the house tonight," she said firmly, though her voice was thick with emotion. "After everything that just happened, it's the absolute least we can do." Keanu smiled that gentle smile of his. "That's very kind, but it's really not necessary. I'd like to pay, Mr. Reeves," the manager said, and there was something in her tone that made it clear this wasn't up for debate. "In the 8 years you've been coming here, you've never once caused a problem. You've been nothing but gracious to our staff, generous with your tips, and patient even when we mess up your order. Tonight, someone disrespected you in our establishment, and while we couldn't prevent that, we can at least do this. Please, let us." He looked at her for a moment, seeming to understand that refusing would actually make her feel worse, so he nodded, tucked his wallet back into his jacket, and thanked her quietly. "I'm sorry about tonight," she added. "That should never have happened. It's not your fault," Keanu replied. "And honestly, maybe something good came out of it. That guy, I think he genuinely wants to change. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can start climbing back up." The manager smiled through her tears. "That's very gracious of you to say. Most people in your position would be demanding we ban him for life." Keanu shrugged. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, he's paying for everyone's meals tonight, which means your staff is going to get amazing tips from grateful customers. See? Something good." He said it so matter-of-factly, finding the silver lining in a situation where most people would only see the negative. That was just who he was, always looking for the light, even in dark moments. As Keanu turned to leave, the elderly man's daughter approached him one more time. She was still wiping tears from her face, but she was smiling now. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for that night 15 years ago. I tried to find you afterward, wanted to thank you in person, but you disappeared. I should have tried harder." Keanu shook his head. "You don't owe me any thanks. I'm just glad you're okay. That's all that mattered to me then, and it's all that matters to me now." "But I do owe you thanks," she insisted. "You saved my life, not just by stopping, but by staying. The paramedics told me later that if you hadn't kept me talking, kept me conscious, I probably would have slipped into a coma from the head trauma. You saved my life, and you never wanted anything in return. That's not normal. That's extraordinary." "It's human," Keanu corrected gently. "Or at least it should be. We should all look out for each other. The world would be a better place if more people stopped to help instead of just driving by." She nodded, understanding that he truly believed what he was saying. This wasn't false modesty or deflection. He genuinely didn't see himself as having done anything special. "Well," she said, "for what it's worth, you changed my life that night. And maybe tonight you changed that young man's life too. You have a gift for helping people, whether you realize it or not." Keanu gave her a warm smile, then gently squeezed her hand before heading toward the door. But he didn't make it very far. Person after person stopped him to shake his hand, to thank him for his kindness over the years, to share their own brief stories of encounters they'd had with him. A teenage busboy mentioned how Keanu always asked about his college applications. A regular customer talked about how Keanu had once given her restaurant recommendations when she mentioned visiting Italy. The couple who'd mentioned the subway incident came over to shake his hand again. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, and through it all, Keanu remained humble and slightly embarrassed by all the attention. Finally, he made it to the door. He paused there for a moment, turning back to look at the restaurant full of people who were all looking at him with such warmth and admiration. He raised his hand in a small wave, and then he was gone, disappearing into the Los Angeles night like he'd never been there at all. The moment the door closed behind him, the restaurant erupted in conversation. Everyone wanted to talk about what they'd just witnessed. People were pulling out their phones, texting friends, posting on social media about the incredible scene they'd been part of. The story would spread across the internet within hours, another addition to the growing legend of Keanu Reeves. But this story wasn't really about Keanu, not entirely. It was about what happens when someone's true character is revealed. It was about the difference between fame and integrity, between being known and being good. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, the drunk guy sat in his car in the parking lot, his friends having already left in a separate vehicle. He'd told them he needed a moment alone. He sat there in the driver's seat, not starting the engine, just staring at his hands on the steering wheel. His phone buzzed. Text messages were coming in from his friends, from people who'd already heard about what happened, from his girlfriend wanting to know why he wasn't answering. He ignored them all. Instead, he pulled up his web browser and typed in Keanu Reeves' good deeds into the search bar. What came up shocked him. Page after page of stories, articles, videos, all documenting years of quiet kindness. Keanu giving up his seat on subways. Keanu stopping to help stranded motorists. Keanu taking pay cuts so that special effects teams could be paid better. Keanu setting up a private cancer foundation after his sister's battle with leukemia. Running it anonymously for years. Keanu buying expensive motorcycles for his stunt team as thank you gifts. Keanu eating lunch with homeless people. Keanu signing autographs for fans at 3 a.m. because they'd waited hours to meet him. The list went on and on. Story after story of a man who had every reason to be arrogant, every excuse to be demanding, every opportunity to be cruel, but who chose kindness instead, every single time. The drunk guy's hands were shaking as he scrolled through the articles. How had he not known any of this? How had he looked at this man and seen only a movie star, only a punchline, only someone to mock for cheap laughs and temporary attention? He thought about his own life, the successful business he'd built, the money he'd made, the respect he thought he commanded. But what had he done with any of it? When was the last time he'd helped someone who couldn't help him back? When was the last time he'd been kind without expecting something in return? When was the last time he'd made someone's day better instead of worse? His friend's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Maybe this is who you're becoming. The thought terrified him because deep down he knew it was true. Somewhere along the way, success had turned him into someone he didn't recognize, someone mean, someone small, someone who needed to tear others down to feel big. But tonight had held up a mirror, and he'd been forced to see himself clearly for the first time in years. And he hated what he saw. He pulled out the card that the woman had given him, the one with her email address. He stared at it for a long time, then carefully placed it in his wallet where he wouldn't lose it. He didn't know if he'd ever actually email her, but having it felt important. Like a reminder. Like a lifeline. Finally, he started his car and drove home, but he took the long way, needing time to think. Tomorrow, he'd wake up with a terrible hangover and a crystal-clear memory of the worst night of his life. But maybe, just maybe, it would also be the beginning of something better. 3 months later, things had changed. The guy had cut back dramatically on his drinking. He'd started volunteering at a homeless shelter every other weekend. He'd apologized to the waiter he'd insulted months before, tracked him down specifically to say sorry. He'd donated money to several charities, not for tax breaks or recognition, but because he'd learned that having resources meant having responsibility. His friends had noticed the change. His girlfriend had noticed. His employees had noticed. He was calmer, kinder, more thoughtful. He still had bad days. He still sometimes felt that old arrogance trying to creep back in. But when it did, he'd pull out his phone and look at a screenshot he'd saved from that night. A grainy photo someone had posted online of Keanu placing his hand on his shoulder, showing him grace when he deserved none. That image had become his North Star, a reminder of the kind of person he wanted to be. Not famous, not wealthy, not successful by the world's standards, but good, simply, genuinely good. He never saw Keanu Reeves again. He'd thought about trying to reach out to apologize again more soberly, more clearly, but in the end he decided the best apology was change. The best thank you was becoming better, and back at Cicada Restaurant life went on. Keanu continued to come in every few weeks, always polite, always kind, always leaving generous tips. The staff never mentioned that night unless he brought it up first, which he never did. In his mind it was already forgotten, just another evening in a long life of evenings. But for everyone else who was there that night, it became a story they told again and again. Not because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. That kindness isn't weakness. That grace isn't defeat. That responding to cruelty with compassion isn't naive. It's courageous, and sometimes, just sometimes, it's exactly what someone needs to change their life. The restaurant kept the security footage from that night, though they never released it publicly. Every now and then, when a new employee would start complaining about a difficult customer or having a bad day, the manager would sit them down and tell them this story. Not to shame anyone, but to remind them that everyone is fighting battles we know nothing about, and that choosing kindness costs nothing but means everything. In a world that often rewards aggression and celebrates ego, one quiet Tuesday evening in a Los Angeles restaurant had reminded everyone present that there's a different way to move through the world. A better way. A way that leaves people better than you found them. And it all started with a simple choice. One that Keanu Reeves made every single day of his life. To be kind, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, that's the real story. Not about a celebrity or a drunk guy or a dramatic confrontation, but about the small, consistent choices that define who we are. The choices we make when nobody's watching and the grace we extend when everyone is.